HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Darkest Glare, a true story of murder, blackmail, and real estate greed in 1979 Los Angeles. By Chip Jacobs. Read by Joel Richards. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. William Shakespeare. Prologue. The cul-de-sac. The man in the rusty Volkswagen had a message he was bursting to share as he rolled up alongside me at the stoplight that I would forever detest. The instant his minibus's spindly tires came to rest, he stretched himself across his gear shift, cranked down the passenger side window, then pantomimed for me to follow suit. Crap, I thought. Let's get this over with. The hasty lecture about how teenage drivers like myself needed to be more careful. And he wouldn't be wrong. 2 blocks back, I made him swerve, in the briefest of asphalt drama, when I tried merging my parents' station wagon into the lane that his weather-battered box of bolts was puttering in, sub-speed limit. Of course, I was distracted. Isn't that shorthand for most 17-year-old boys? Sorry, sir, I'd tell Mr. VW with bogus wholesomeness. I'll check my mirrors better next time. The grouch had already tooted his reedy horn to register his displeasure, so I guessed this was his coda. But when I slid my window down and swiveled my head, intending to nod with sheepish contrition, the guessing was moot. I got a taste of the unforeseen, a pair of seething, bloodshot eyes that sent my core body temperature reeling. "Hey, motherfucker!" he yelled over his clattering muffler. "I'm gonna get you!" Get me? Spittle pelted out of his window with every other syllable, and he pumped his fist for emphasis. The stranger gunning for me over a traffic peccadillo was adhering to a codebook whose fine print wouldn't let this go with a disapproving eyebrow. "Yeah, you motherfucker," he said, changing things up. "You." I suddenly disliked that pronoun, even as I was too petrified to watch him repeat it. So I gazed straight through my windshield, piecing together what I'd seen. A storkish figure, whose hippie-long chestnut hair splayed over a tattered U.S. Army jacket, veins bulging around the whiskers of a bearded neck, a fixed glower engraved into his cheeks. If Martin Scorsese needed to cast an everyman one small offense from detonation, he'd found his next Travis Bickle in this hothead. Seconds dragged out like minutes at the red light trapping me next to him. While I'd checkered my early driving record pretty good, dinging and denting that troop carrier-size Pontiac Grand Safari, there was no analog for this. We were on Woodman Avenue, a windy road through suburban Altadena, the small bohemian city north of my hometown, Pasadena, and I had no idea what to do. "I'm gonna get you," the 30-something regurgitated, in a voice still molten with dander. "You." Once the light changed, I tapped the gas pedal, praying he would rumble past. Movement in the rear scuttled that delusion. By popping his clutch, he jerked his white, orange-trimmed cube behind me in tactical advantage for whatever punishment he was devising. Then the subsequent light flashed red, like it too was in on the conspiracy. Idling there, I avoided my mirrors. Viewing that scowl once was enough to make you want to unsee it. Sitting to my right that misty spring afternoon in 1979 was my best friend, Dave Ferris, who had never known the car as anything other than a faux wood-sided chariot for our expanding liberties. In it, we traveled to smoky rock concerts at the fabulous Forum and to cake-fueled house parties, blissfully free of chaperones, to the Hilltop all-girls Catholic school, where we trolled for dates until the fleet-footed nuns rousted us off the grounds. On the rain-slickened road, None of that juvenile carousing meant squat now. Neither did the anecdote we were snickering about when all this exploded. How the dentures of our Napoleon-sized history professor recently fell out of his mouth mid-lecture, prompting our class to erupt in hysterics. Apologies, Mr. Hamilton. I flicked off our preferred radio station, KROQ, leaving us in ringing silence, except for the VW exhaust pipe, crackling like it had mechanical emphysema. Dave and I stared at each other in disbelief, spectators to our undoing. We were isolated with little other traffic around, and definitely no sheriff patrol cars that we glibly called Omar, as in Omar Sharif. Notions about raiding the pantry at my house for an after-school snack were gone. I never felt grimmer about my lifespan. When the stoplight changed this time, I stopped the accelerator connected to the Pontiac's burly V8 engine, thinking we'd zoom away. Unfortunately, it only zoomed us to the next red light. The VW now vibrated inches off my chrome bumper, too close for its obsessive master to spot the neon Led Zeppelin sticker. I needed separation. As soon as this light winked green, I steered slowly into the right lane, trying to act chastened. Maybe if he flipped me the bird, confident that he'd taught me a lesson, he'd tear away. Yeah, right. He motored up parallel to us a second time to wet his lips and re-screw that frown into his reddened face. At that moment, even this sheltered high school junior realized I had to do something drastic or risk being a body bag filmed for the top of the 6 o'clock TV news. As soon as the stoplight changed, I glided a block before veering off with a sharp 90-degree turn onto the first street we passed. Psycho killer? Qu'est-ce que c'est? You've been ditched, that's what. I checked my rearview mirror, anxious for relief before feeling another cold stab to the belly. Not only was our pursuer still behind us, his van was obstructing our escape on the bottom of a block that was actually a cul-de-sac devoid of anyone but us. This motherfucker kid had no way out. The world was a cantankerous, random place then, just as it seems to be today as our iPhones ping alerts about the latest mass shooting, the latest suicide bomber, the latest person pushed beyond their structural limits. There was no Google or Priuses yet, no melting glaciers, Russian hacking, or global pandemics. There were phone booths and tricked-out Camaros, computers as big as steamer crates, and eye-watering smog that was supposed to be long gone. At our school, Flint Ridge Preparatory, just above the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, we learned about how history waterfalls in cycles, where prosperity crumbles into recession and fascism bristles into nationalism. Yet no grown-up ever explained to us late-stage baby boomers why average Americans were lashing out in uncoined road rage and cult violence, why people were hanging state leaders in effigy and applying for gun permits in droves. To me, as a teenage sociologist, it was generational venting. Every 20 years or so, the demoralized were bound to snarl that the system they thought had liberated them from tyranny was a candy-coated mirage, more interested in selling them Buicks than binding societal wounds. Everything was going south in the red, white, and blue. Disillusionment after Vietnam and Watergate had fermented into embitterment and insecurity about the 80s. Twice this decade, Arab nations embargoed the oil that powered the economy, while a dour Jimmy Carter cajoled us to turn down our thermostats in his Mr. Rogers sweater. Here in Southern California, the only folk still portraying the zeitgeist as mellow, or worse, charmingly kooky, worked for the Chamber of Commerce. Yes, the coastline still shimmered in golden hues, and tourists bought maps to celebrities' homes. Behind those images was the blistering reality of a tottering, paradise of rising crime and waning opportunity. Local factories were yanking up tent poles in the first whiffs of globalization. In once tranquil neighborhoods, homeowners were double-locking their doors to bar predators. The freeway killer, the hillside strangler, the dating game killer, stacking up the corpses. It's easy to see this dark spirit mirrored in today's refraction. An orange comb-over reality TV star pledging to "Make America Great Again" is a poor man's Ronald Reagan, who adored comparing America's potential to a shining city on the hill. Today's sucker-punched middle class was yesteryear's casualties of stagflation. Wall Street bailouts during the Great Recession recall the $1.5 billion federal loan to Chrysler Corporation that many jeered as corporate welfare. Citizens mistrustful of public institutions should revisit the national mood after a military helicopter crashed in Iranian sands trying to rescue our hostages. The American dream, overpromised, underdelivered. The surreal events of March 1979 confirmed to this book's protagonist a quirk of Los Angeles topography. Even a high desert area contains ravenous creatures you'd associate with marshland hazards. They just happen to walk upright. As a young space planner from a cloistered childhood, he never could have imagined that his city of scattered high-rises, Hollywood sets, and aerospace giants would be capable of dispatching do-anything killers after him. Never could have envisioned that he would be on the run before he'd really lived. Climbing out of his old VW to confront us, the stork man was taller than I surmised, easily 6'3". It seemed to take him only 5 gangly strides to reach the Pontiac, where Dave and I became statues as he sidled up to the driver's side window. Any moment I expected his hand would wave a pistol, knife, or club. Then the oddest thing happened. My mind drifted above my expected doom. When I should have been fashioning a defense, I found myself perplexed about what existential misery, divorce, illness, unemployment, post-Vietnam voices in his head, he needed to exorcise by splattering blood over the caramel leather upholstery. Some part of me had to decode his suffering before he mangled us over it. Now came our comeuppance. The stork man thrust his head so deep into the car's interior that I had to tilt awkwardly toward Dave, while simultaneously trying not to shit myself, to keep from touching his scraggly beard. You could tell an ancient rage smoldered around his temples. Panic coiled around mine. "Don't ever do that to me again," he said with a snort. "You hear me?" His breath reeked of nicotine as well as something harder to define, something diseased. "Yes, sir," I stammered. He peered deep into my twitchy eyes, calculating the pros and cons of what he'd like to inflict upon us. His right fist swayed near my chin, which had yet to meet its first razor blade. What was in his other hand, the one concealed outside the car? "Our Father who art in—" Abruptly he seemed to realize what he was doing, that he'd unleashed his inner demons where they didn't belong. He retracted his hand, then his long neck, stomping back to a vehicle synonymous with the peace and love movement. Dave and I exhaled, our shirts damp. "Never again!" he shouted over his puffing muffler as he floored it. Something tells me that we weren't the last ones he'd stalk over the trivial in the home of the free. Chip Jacobs, Pasadena, California, 2020. Chapter 1. A Deck for All Seasons. They huddled at the base of the stairs, panting steam, packing bad intentions. Above their heads, a patch of soft light glowed through the sliding glass window outside the master bedroom of the 2-story home where two people lay in bed. People oblivious to approaching invaders, while rain from another heavy storm pounded down. People who assumed they had all the time in the world to get high and then naked. The ringleader, here to supervise the task that his minions had bungled with almost comical frequency, whispered how the midnight operation was to unfold. Their movements needed to be cat-quick and meticulous, not so much as a cuticle left behind. The soggy evening with the neighborhood toasty under mid-century roofs was an advantage they dare not squander. Everything rode on the bullet scheduled to fly from the barrel of a vintage rifle originally mass-produced to kill Nazis. So much hinged on a single projectile needed to free up the spoils and the kickoff of a lucrative enterprise that Los Angeles had never seen before. If the designated shooter misfired and his chief's brackish vengeance went unexpunged, beware. The next bullet might have the assassin's name emblazoned on it. Whoever said the San Fernando Valley was dishwater dull? The trio crept up the flight, past a potted fern, toward the deck overlooking a backyard pool sloshing chlorine whitecaps in the deluge. They arranged themselves into position next, just as they'd rehearsed, squatting on the opposite edges of the window to evaluate the scene inside the fishbowl-lit room. What a glorious sight it was! The fellow they'd been hunting for months was mere feet away, reclined sideways in his queen-size bed, listening to a cute woman in a male pajama top reading. The killers who'd driven in from points east were different breeds united by a common purpose. The trigger man was a diminutive, helmet-haired character, salivating to use the big gun he'd acquired in a crafty haggle. His wingman was a thin, lyrically named crook without his cohort's felony notches. Both were atop heroin dragons when tonight's launch button was pressed, but they'd made emergency landings to attempt sobering up in a snap. Coffee, a frigid shower. The last thing they intended to do was quibble over timing with a boss whose buzzardy face was the final visage a handful of unfortunate sorts ever saw. Anyone fuzzy about what Pat was capable of doing should interview their ex-associate, the one who'd developed misgivings after accepting this contract and fled town, welching on his promise, had visited terror on his family, and nearly resulted in his own skull being rearranged with a .357 Magnum on a San Francisco sidewalk. Someone else who'd infuriated Pat was unable to vocalize any warnings. He'd gone from sipping cocktails on a fall afternoon to being set ablaze in the scrubland outside L.A. Pat's management philosophy about his underlings completing their assignments was absolute. He'd tolerate no job suggestion boxes, only compliance. Now he crouched over his marksman's shoulder, eyes glazed, mouth ajar, waiting for the muzzle flash that he'd been fantasizing to rubberneck. Ding! What better timing for another in a series of what-now hiccups to frustrate them again like klutzes in a clown show? He'd been seconds from flashing the signal. The new message: how fickle opportunity can be. The target, a college boy, real estate entrepreneur who once employed him in a manipulative partnership, must have heeded the beep of a Darwinian radar, must have attuned to an inner frequency that he and his woman might not be as alone as they figured. The rustling of feet, a squeaky plank, heebie-jeebies that foreign eyes were watching them. Whatever his sixth sense detected was worth investigating. The man they'd come to obliterate lifted his drowsy head off his snuggly comforter, twisting it in the opposite direction of the blonde with him. Next, he did something nobody here had anticipated in their elaborate preparations. He stared directly at them, behind the window representing the single barrier between him and his supposed last gasps of air. Hey, was someone out there? from his recesses. Pat cringed and cursed, fit to be tied, questioning if he should have toted along a lucky rabbit's foot. How gruesome things would get for prey and predators alike, he knew, if that window's glare didn't thwart his quarry from seeing the truth, from realizing what lurked beneath his dripping eaves. Chapter 2. The Spacemen of Miracle Mile. 13 months before that disquieting bunch assembled on the sun deck, Gerald Jerry Schneiderman pulled up a chair inside a tacky Mexican restaurant, preparing himself to hear out a man excited about a little greed. Richard Kasparov, his coiffed older partner, was already in presentation mode by the time Jerry strolled in from Pico Boulevard with a sales chart poking from his breast pocket and a schedule cleared for the afternoon. Jerry, unable to recall the last time that he arrived at a meeting after his chronically late associate, blurted the obvious. "Wow, Richard, this must be a big deal." "Be nice," Richard said with a Cheshire cat grin. "You're going to be thanking me later." For the next 90 minutes, Richard attempted with an impassioned appeal to show how they could enrich themselves by further expanding their footprint. They were already risk-takers compared with their more seasoned competitors, who staked their tent poles, diagramming interior layouts on schematics given to general contractors to build out. By giving their space design clientele the ability to hire their suite building and furniture services subsidiaries, they had created a one-stop shop that maximized efficiencies in what was often a dizzying decision-making process. Executive offices and secretarial pods, conference rooms and smart hallways, wall coverings and light fixtures, electrical outlets and reception areas. There was little that Richard and Jerry couldn't streamline. Richard's genius notion now? To export those skills into remodeling luxury homes. It was quixotic. It was daring. And it was so Richard, who craved to socialize with and schmooze the L.A. money crowd. "Think about it," he said mid-pitch. "We've been in real estate forever. We know the trades. We have the back-office staff. And it could introduce us to a new set of people, maybe even investors. Stop me whenever I reach a negative." "As if I could," Jerry said, crunching a tortilla chip. "You've got to say yes. Look where we are." Both men laughed with a whimsical tinge. Don Ricardo's was wedged in the basement of the checkerboard mirrored office building across from the Hillcrest Country Club, where they'd hatched Space Matters, their double entendre named firm, 18 months earlier. They'd scarfed down many a burrito here, under the cramped stucco ceiling since then, before relocating to a larger office after demand for their business swelled. Something, though, was different, something obvious. Jerry had rarely seen Richard's face so animated, even in their hectic early days, when they were punch-drunk from pulling all-nighters on bad coffee and other stimulants. "Peruse this, dude," he said, "while I hit the head. It'll get your heart pumping." He slid over a free-handed chart, depicting projected sales curling up like a ski jump. As Richard strode off, several attractive female lunch patrons shot him flirtatious glances, without his libido broadcasting interest. "Never changes," Jerry muttered under his breath. And it never would. At 38, Richard could have fallen out of a GQ magazine spread featuring beautiful California males. He was a lean 6'1", with a clipped beard-mustache combination, and a thick mane of feathered brown hair. His million-dollar smile and extroverted air worked synergistically with a blocky forehead and full lips. Clothes also adored him, whether in tailored suits at a high-stakes meeting or in a second-hand army jacket flipping burgers at a backyard barbecue. Richard evoked a sizzle that made ladies swoon and some men envious. In his bachelor days, he probably spent more time cavorting just at Pips and the Friars Club than his partner had spent in bars his entire life. Jerry had envisaged this odd couple team precisely because he lacked Richard's gregariousness, lacked the flair that made people want to root for him. He was a skinny 5'10", 160 pounds, with medium brown hair that twirled into a natural frizz. His unlined, youthful face caused more than a few executives to mistake him for a college student or intern. Sleepy, green-brown eyes and faint smile lines gave him a kind of mousy allure. To appear older than his 26 years, he outfitted himself in suits that weren't just off the rack. "Why hamstring ourselves just to the commercial market?" Richard continued, scooting up his ratty Naga-hide chair. "I have a group of rich people interested in us doing their houses." "You do? I don't see much downside, only blue sky that might not come again." Jerry quizzed Richard about the specifics of his proposal. His response, a pastiche of exuberance, salesmanship, and detail, represented an entrepreneur who aspired for more. Jerry didn't know that Richard would suggest they broaden into the residential market, but he always expected something like this was inevitable. After all, they were both strivers. When he urged Richard to leave the space design conglomerate where they met to charter their own company, visions of money, challenge, and legacy danced in his own head. Richard's pitch continued for another 20 minutes before Jerry lofted a palm. "You sold me," he said with a grin. "Let's do it." "Really? You're not just acquiescing?" "Really." "Here's to a new adventure, then, and pouncing on what others haven't." A clink of their margarita glasses formalized it. They'd christen their home remodeling offshoot CM2, as in Construction Management 2. Jerry's frijoles had gone cold while Richard hyped their futures. From the Mexican restaurant, Jerry steered his white Mercedes-Benz convertible north onto La Cienega Boulevard, hanging a right onto one of the city's mainstay thoroughfares. Wilshire Boulevard was still lined by signature architecture, vintage towers crowned with mounted clocks, the Art Deco Bullock's department store, the Mediterranean meets grandeur of the Ambassador Hotel, as well as more contemporary, mirrored high-rises on its ends. A few miles east of the La Brea tar pits, where fake prehistoric animals sat in murky black pools, Jerry pulled off Wilshire into the company parking lot. Then he scurried inside. The office that swallowed him 50 to 60 hours a week was a funky Spanish-style mansion on the edge of one of L.A.'s oldest blue-blood communities. He and Richard wanted a headquarters with curb appeal as unique as the designs they were crafting, and the old manor, with a red tile roof and pimply white stucco exterior, called out to them. Vaulted ceilings and French doors accented the interior, with wrought iron railings across the upper floor and the haunting bust of a woman in front. The staff and Richard worked on the second level of the 5,500-square-foot building. Jerry was the only soul on the ground floor. At $232,000, the place was a steal. And theirs. On the day they took the plunge into home remodeling, Space Matter's existing success tickled Jerry's senses. He watched Bert, one of several Filipino employees there, examining an architectural schematic, and overheard his French-born decorator, Lillian, speaking frenetically to a supplier. The sound of collective bustle, the crinkle of unfurling blueprints, the thud of the front door closing as someone rushed out to an appointment, the jingling phones, had become a second heartbeat. So, after he caught up on messages, Jerry galloped up the stairs, shifting from desk to desk to ensure that his people had their projects under control. When he was done, he returned to his paper-blizzarded office to resume drawing himself. The next time he lifted his head from his sketches to check his watch, he was dumbfounded to see that the hour
Sample complete. Ready to continue?